In a forgotten American town, two brothers lived quietly, dreaming of a better life. Daniel, the elder, worked day and night, carrying the weight of the family on his shoulders. His younger brother, Michael, saw him not just as a brother, but as his hero. But sometimes fate is cruel. One night, their world was shattered by a ruthless gang leader named Victor. That night changed everything. From love and sacrifice rose a fire of revenge that could not be stopped. It was late evening in a quiet American town, the kind of place where streets fell silent long before midnight. In a small wooden house on the edge of that town lived two brothers, Daniel and Michael. Daniel, the elder, was the strength of the family. Every morning he left before sunrise, working double shifts to keep their little world together. Michael, the younger brother, admired him deeply. For Michael, Daniel was more than a sibling. He was a protector, a guide, almost like a father figure. Their mother was sick and bedridden, and nearly every dollar Daniel earned went to her medicine. Life was tough, but love gave the house warmth. On quiet nights, the brothers would sit together, sharing hopes and fears. Michael thought those evenings would last forever. But fate had already written a storm into their story, one that would change everything. Across town, shadows ruled the night. A gang led by Victor, a man feared for his cold cruelty, controlled the streets. His men, Tony, Jack, Carlos, and Steve, collected money from shopkeepers, workers, and even struggling families. To refuse was to invite destruction. Everyone in town knew the rule. You either pay Victor or you disappear. For months, Daniel had managed to avoid attention, but rumors spread quickly. The gang heard he was saving money for his mother's treatment, and greed made them hungry. Michael often worried about it, but Daniel's courage never wavered. "Fear is how they control people," he told Michael one night. "If we bow even once, we'll bow forever." Those words gave Michael strength, but they also filled him with fear. He knew his brother's pride could one day bring danger to their doorstep. One evening, Michael returned home from the market and felt uneasy. He noticed two men across the street watching silently. Their stares were heavy, their presence threatening. He quickened his pace, rushed inside, and locked the door. Daniel was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, his tired face still carrying a smile. Michael wanted to warn him, but Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't live in fear, little brother. Our life is already hard. If we lose courage too, then what do we have left?" Michael forced a smile, but sleep did not come that night. From the window, he saw the same shadows at the corner, unmoving, like predators waiting for the right moment. His heart pounded with dread. He lay awake, listening to Daniel's steady breathing, never realizing that those sounds were among the last he would ever hear from him. The following evening, trouble arrived. Loud knocks shook the wooden door. When Daniel opened it, Tony and Jack stood there, grinning with arrogance. "We've heard you've got money," Jack sneered. "Hand it over and nothing happens." Daniel stood tall, calm, but unshaken. "This money belongs to my mother's medicine," he replied firmly. "You will not touch it." The men laughed, mocking his courage. Michael felt his stomach twist in fear as he peeked from the side. He wanted to shout, to beg them to leave, but his throat was dry. Tony leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "Nobody says no to Victor. You'll regret this." Daniel remained silent, his eyes steady. That silence was more powerful than anger. Finally, the men left, but the look they gave promised something darker. Michael knew it wasn't over. That night, Michael tried once more to reason with his brother. "Why fight them?" he asked desperately. "Why risk your life? Please, Daniel, just give them something. We can't stand against them." Daniel sat quietly, then spoke with calm certainty. "If we bow once, Michael, they will own us forever. Do you want to spend your life under their shadow? Because I don't." His words carried strength, but they cut Michael deeply. Fear gripped him harder than ever. He imagined their mother without Daniel, imagined himself left alone. He sat near the dim lamp, staring at shadows dancing across the wall, praying the night would pass quietly. Outside, faint voices echoed, footsteps and laughter that didn't belong there. Michael's chest tightened. The storm was getting closer. The storm finally struck. As Daniel and Michael returned home with groceries, the gang surrounded them in a narrow alley. Victor himself appeared, his cold eyes glowing with menace. "We gave you a chance, Daniel," he mocked. "Now you'll pay." Michael froze, his legs refusing to move. Daniel pushed him back, as always, protecting him. "Stay behind me," he ordered firmly. Chaos broke out, shouts, punches, threats. Michael's voice cracked as he begged them to stop, but the men didn't care. The nightmare lasted only minutes, but it felt eternal. Finally, Daniel fell, his strength drained. His body collapsed onto the ground. With fading breath, he turned to Michael. "Take care of Mom, and never bow to them." His eyes closed, leaving only silence. Michael's scream tore through the night, echoing against the alley walls. His world had just been shattered. Michael sat frozen in the alley, his brother's body lying lifeless beside him. The world around him blurred. The shouts of the gang, their laughter, the sound of footsteps fading as they disappeared into the night. Everything felt unreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. His hands shook violently as he touched Daniel's face, hoping to feel warmth, hoping to hear his voice again. But there was only silence. Tears streamed down Michael's cheeks, falling onto the cold pavement. "You promised we'd be okay," he whispered, his voice breaking. In that moment, a seed of fire was planted inside him. Grief was crushing, but behind it, anger began to grow. He felt helpless, weak and broken, but deep within, something was changing. He didn't know how or when, but he swore to himself. This would not be the end of Daniel's story. The days that followed were heavy with sorrow. Their mother, frail and sick, asked about Daniel again and again. Michael could not bring himself to tell her the truth. Instead, he said Daniel was working late or away on a job. Every lie cut his heart deeper, but he couldn't break her with the reality. At night, when she slept, Michael sat alone in the small living room, staring at the chair where Daniel used to sit. Every corner of the house reminded him of his brother. The silence was unbearable. Friends and neighbors offered pity, but none of them dared mention Victor's name. Everyone knew what had happened, yet no one would speak. That silence felt like betrayal. Michael realized that in this town, fear was stronger than justice. That night, for the first time, he whispered to himself, "I will not be silent. I will not bow." Michael knew he couldn't fight Victor and his gang with strength. He was only one man, ordinary and untrained. But Daniel had once told him, "A sharp mind can cut deeper than a sharp blade." Holding on to those words, Michael began to think differently. He started observing, listening, and watching from the shadows. He followed Victor's men quietly, learning their routines. Tony drank late at a bar every night. Jack often argued with Carlos over money. Steve secretly met with a woman who was not his wife. Slowly, Michael collected pieces of their lives, weaknesses hidden beneath their violent masks. He also spoke with people in town, carefully, gently, gaining their trust. Some hated Victor but were too afraid to act. Michael promised them silence if they shared information. Bit by bit, a plan began to take shape. His grief had transformed into strategy. Daniel's death would not go unanswered. The first crack appeared within the gang when Michael spread a simple lie. He whispered to a bartender that Victor was planning to replace Tony with someone else. By the next night, the rumor reached Tony himself. Suspicion grew like poison. Michael watched from a distance as Tony confronted Victor, shouting about loyalty. Victor brushed it off with cold laughter, but the seed of doubt had been planted. A few nights later, Michael slipped anonymous tips to the police about Jack's illegal deals. Jack barely escaped arrest, and he suspected Carlos had betrayed him. The gang began to argue more openly, their unity weakening. For the first time, Michael felt hope. He wasn't fighting them with fists. He was tearing them apart. With their own greed and mistrust, every small victory gave him strength. But he knew the real battle still lay ahead, with Victor himself. One night, as Michael walked the empty streets, he felt a presence behind him. He turned quickly and saw Steve, one of Victor's men, blocking his path. "You've been asking questions," Steve said coldly. Michael's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied. Steve stepped closer, his eyes sharp. "Be careful, kid. Curiosity can get you killed." He walked away, leaving Michael shaken but determined. He realized he was no longer invisible. The gang was starting to notice. That meant time was running out. He had to act faster, strike harder, and finish what he had begun before Victor realized the truth. Back at home, Michael stood in front of a cracked mirror. His reflection looked different. Eyes darker, face harder, voice steadier. He was no longer the frightened boy hiding behind his brother. He was becoming something else, someone Daniel would barely recognize. Yet in his heart, he knew this path wasn't about hatred alone. It was about justice, about keeping Daniel's last words alive. "Never bow," Daniel had said, and Michael would not. He placed his hand on the table where Daniel once kept his wallet and whispered, "I will finish this for you, brother. I promise." In that vow, Michael's transformation was complete. The game had begun, and Victor had no idea that the boy he once ignored was now the enemy in the shadows. Michael's small victories had started to ripple through Victor's empire. The once tight-knit gang now looked over their shoulders, whispering suspicions, trading angry glares. But Michael knew breaking their trust wasn't enough. He needed to strike directly. He sat at his desk late one night, scribbling notes, connecting dots. Daniel's voice echoed in his memory, "Be patient, but never hesitate when the time comes." Michael's patience was wearing thin. He had to move. His first target was Tony. Everyone knew Tony's weakness, alcohol. That night, Michael waited outside the bar where Tony drowned himself. When Tony stumbled into the alley, Michael was ready. Wearing a mask, he struck with precision, knocking Tony unconscious, leaving behind a warning note that read, "For Daniel." When Tony woke, bruised and shaken, he was terrified. He didn't know who had attacked him, but he believed Victor had sent the message. Tony's trust in his leader shattered completely. Next came Jack. Michael planted fake evidence that pointed to Carlos stealing from the gang's funds. Jack, already suspicious, exploded with rage. Their argument turned violent, fists flying, knives flashing in the dim light of the warehouse. Michael watched from the shadows, his plan working perfectly. By the time Victor arrived to break it up, both men were bleeding and furious. The gang's unity was crumbling faster than Michael had hoped. But Victor was no fool. He sensed someone was manipulating his crew. "There's a ghost among us," he growled to his men. Fear spread like wildfire. No one trusted anyone anymore. Steve, the sharpest of them, began to suspect Michael. He remembered the strange way Michael had looked at him the night they crossed paths. "The kid's not as weak as he looks," Steve warned Victor. But Victor laughed, dismissing the idea. "He's nothing. Just a boy mourning his brother." Those words lit a fire in Michael's chest. He swore Victor would regret underestimating him. Michael prepared his boldest move yet. He set fire to one of Victor's stash. Houses, a warehouse filled with stolen goods and illegal cash. Flames roared into the night sky, sirens wailed, and Victor's men scrambled in panic. Watching from a rooftop, Michael felt no guilt. Every burning dollar, every collapsing wall felt like justice for Daniel. But this time, Victor did not laugh. His fury was uncontrollable. "Find him!" he shouted to his crew. "I want the ghost who did this, and I want him alive." Back home, Michael sat in the dark, exhausted but resolute. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the war he had started. He knew Victor would come for him soon, but he no longer cared. He was ready. Looking at Daniel's photograph, Michael whispered, "Brother, I've started something I can't stop, and when it ends, it will end with Victor's blood." The transformation was complete. Michael was no longer a grieving brother. He was now a hunter. Victor's empire was burning, not just in flames, but in loyalty. Tony refused to follow orders. Jack blamed Carlos for everything. Steve alone stayed calm, his eyes sharp, his suspicion growing. "It's Michael," Steve whispered to Victor. "The boy is behind this." Victor slammed his fist on the table. "Then bring him to me, alive." The order was clear, and the hunt began. That night, Michael returned home to find the door half open. He froze, heart pounding. Inside, his mother sat trembling, a bruise on her face. Steve stood behind her, a gun in hand. "Victor wants to see you," Steve said coldly. Michael clenched his fists, rage boiling inside. His mother whispered, "Don't go, son." But Michael had no choice. For his mother's safety, he followed Steve into the dark. They dragged him to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Victor sat waiting, surrounded by his men. The air smelled of oil, blood, and fear. "So the mouse thinks he's a lion," Victor sneered. Michael stared at him, unflinching. "I'm not a lion. I'm justice." Laughter erupted from the gang, but Victor's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the weak boy he remembered. This was someone else. Victor ordered his men to beat Michael. Fists slammed into his body, boots crushed his ribs, but Michael refused to scream. Through the pain, he smiled, a bloody, defiant smile. "You're already falling apart," he whispered. His words cut deeper than his wounds. Tony and Jack exchanged uncertain glances. Doubt spread among the men. For the first time, Victor saw hesitation in his crew. Seizing the moment, Michael shouted, "Victor killed Daniel like a coward! He hides behind you because he's afraid to get his hands dirty." The words ignited fury. Jack lunged at Victor, years of anger exploding. Chaos erupted, guns drawn, fists flying, betrayal tearing the gang apart. In the madness, Michael grabbed Steve's dropped pistol. The warehouse echoed with violence as the Empire finally devoured itself. Victor charged at Michael, rage blazing in his eyes. The two collided, fists clashing in a brutal fight. Victor was stronger, but Michael fought with something more. Purpose. Every punch carried Daniel's memory. Every strike carried his vow. Finally, with one desperate shot, Michael pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Victor, silence falling over the chaos. Victor collapsed, eyes wide with shock, as if he couldn't believe the boy had won. Michael stood over him, breath ragged. "This is for Daniel." The survivors fled, their loyalty broken. Michael stumbled outside as dawn broke, bloodied but unbowed. The first light of morning touched his face. His war was over, but the scars would remain forever. Looking up at the sky, he whispered, "Rest now, brother. Justice has been served.